Right now, I'll show you the method for making a histogram. A histogram is a way of displaying continuous data. Often the data will be rounded, but you can imagine that with enough accuracy, every single data point could be different. For this reason, we group data points together. If we identify the lowest and highest numbers, we can quickly find the range. We want to try to have about 5 or 6 columns in general, maybe a few more for a very large data set. Our range here is 7.5. If we make each column width 1, then we'd have to have 8 columns, and that's too many. An ideal number of columns for this data would be 5. If we take the range and divide it by 5, we get 1.5, which is perfect for our column width. So, if we choose the lowest end of the first column to be 14, that's a number below the lowest number in our data set, we can see that the first column is going to run from 14 to 15.5. That makes it 1.5 units wide. The next column is going to go from 15.5 to 17, again 1.5 units long, and so on down the list. Once we have our intervals defined, we can start to tally the number that fall into each class. Mark which ones you've counted as you go, but don't obliterate them. You may have to go back and redo the count with different intervals if your histogram does not show the shape of your data well. Not having whole numbers makes tallying a tiny bit more complicated, but we really need to see how our data behaves. So always choose a class interval that gives you 5 or 6, maybe 7 columns. A good rule of thumb is if you square the number of columns, you get roughly the number of data points. Here we've got 24 data points, so 5 columns is perfect. Once we have our data tallied, we can construct our histogram. Remember that we plot the axis along the real number line and the intervals run into one another. This means that our columns touch. Draw the columns up to the correct height. Now you see how our data is spread out. It rises quickly on the left-hand side and then tails off much more slowly to the right. Because of the longer tail on the right-hand side, the mean is going to be higher than the median for this data. You can see, however, that it's nicely clustered around the central value close to 17. And that's it. That's your histogram made.